If someone's words make you doubt your reality, and you begin to feel small, confused, or dependent in their presence, this is not connection, this is control. Many people mistake intensity for intimacy, but the energy of a narcissist does not expand you, it contracts you. It makes you shrink yourself to fit into their approval. And this is their most clever trick. They don't always use aggression. They use attention. They use praise. They use confusion, not to lift you, but to own you. So today, let us look, not just with our eyes, but with our inner awareness. Because the danger of narcissistic manipulation is not only in what they do, it is in what they train you to ignore, your intuition, your boundaries, your body's discomfort. Once you begin to return to your breath, to your body, and to your clear perception, you are no longer a mirror for their ego. You become your own center. And this, my friend, is when the control ends. There is a profound truth we often overlook, that attention is life energy. In many ancient traditions, attention is considered the seed of reality. What you give your attention to, you nourish. In the hands of a wise person, attention becomes a tool for growth, connection, and healing. But in the presence of a manipulator, especially a narcissist, your attention becomes a weapon. Not one aimed outward, but one slowly turned inward, used to erode your clarity, your peace, and eventually your identity. When you're in the presence of a narcissist, you may feel a strange intensity, like the room has shifted, like your sense of self has been pulled slightly off center. You may find yourself constantly thinking about them. What do they need? How are they feeling? What do they mean by what they just said? You might replay conversations long after they end. You scan your own words for flaws, worrying you said too much or not enough. This is no accident. This is not affection. It is a psychological mechanism called attentional capture, and narcissists are masterful at it. Modern neuroscience tells us that what we repeatedly pay attention to shapes the very wiring of our brains. The neurons that fire together, wire together. If you are constantly giving attention to someone who subtly manipulates or criticizes you, your brain begins to prioritize their needs, their emotions, their moods, not your own. Over time, your internal reference point shifts. You no longer ask, "What do I feel?" You ask, "How will they react if I say this?" You no longer trust your own intuition. Instead, you look to them for validation, like a compass that only spins, never points north. A woman once shared her story with me. She was in a relationship with a man who was charming, intelligent, and always said the right things. But she noticed something strange. Every time they had an argument, he would never directly insult her. Instead, he would ask questions that made her doubt herself. "Are you sure you remember it that way?" Or, "You always get too emotional when you're tired." Over time, she began questioning her memory, her reactions, even her sanity. And yet, he never raised his voice, never broke a plate, never called her a name. Still, her sense of self began to dissolve. Why? Because her attention had been hijacked. The brain treats uncertainty like a problem to solve. If someone gives you 100% affection or 100% rejection, the mind quickly adapts. But if someone gives you 50%, withholds the other 50%, and leaves you wondering, you stay hooked. The loop never closes. This is not love. This is a cognitive trap designed by those who understand how emotion and attention are connected. In traditional Eastern philosophy, there's a concept called the monkey mind. The part of our awareness that jumps from one thing to another, always chasing, always restless. Narcissists do not calm this mind. They provoke it. They keep it in motion. The more unstable your attention becomes, the more stable their control becomes. The irony is painful. You think you are working harder to make the relationship better. But what you are actually doing is feeding the system that traps you. In Shaolin practice, we are taught to still the mind by anchoring it in breath, movement, and presence. This is not just to cultivate peace, it is to reclaim power. Because when you learn to hold your attention, no one can steal it. You become the gatekeeper of your own awareness. And this is what a narcissist fears the most. Not your anger, not your confrontation, but your quiet clarity. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever felt yourself shrink in someone's presence? Not physically, but energetically. You begin to speak more cautiously. You choose your words like a diplomat. You begin to anticipate their moods before they even enter the room. This is not because you are weak. It is because your attention has been trained to move toward them rather than toward yourself. And once that happens, your emotional compass no longer points to your truth. It points to their reactions. A simple but powerful exercise: the next time you are with someone who makes you feel emotionally unstable, do nothing. Observe your breath. Observe your bodily sensations. Where is the tension? Where is the tightness? Ask yourself, am I holding space for myself in this moment? You may notice something surprising. The moment you begin to turn inward and reclaim your attention, the manipulative energy begins to resist. They may escalate. They may provoke. They may accuse you of being distant, cold, or uncaring. But this is only a reaction to losing control over the one thing they truly value: your focus. Attention is a mirror. If you hold it up to someone who is whole, they will meet you with openness. If you hold it up to someone who is fractured, they will try to shatter it. Narcissists don't want to see their true reflection. They want to control yours. And so we move to the next layer of understanding. Once your attention is drawn outward, the narcissist begins the process of destabilizing your internal reference points. This is not always loud or violent. In fact, it is often quiet, eerily quiet. Confusion becomes the weapon. And confusion, when prolonged, leads to emotional fog. Emotional fog is not simply a lack of clarity. It is a subtle rewiring of the nervous system. The amygdala, the brain's alarm system, begins to fire more often. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for logical decision-making, becomes overwhelmed. The body enters a low-grade stress response that becomes chronic. This is what we call limbic hijack. In such a state, your decisions are no longer based on wisdom or truth. They are based on fear and survival. A man once came to a monastery retreat. He was in his mid-50s, quiet, and seemed deeply reflective. After several days, he opened up and shared that he had left a 20-year marriage. His wife, he explained, had never hit him, never yelled at him, and never left him. But he said he felt like a ghost in his own home. She always made me feel like I misunderstood things, like I was too sensitive, or that I was forgetting what actually happened. But the more I tried to explain, the more she would twist my words. I started recording our conversations, just to prove to myself I wasn't losing my mind. What he experienced is known in psychology as gaslighting. It is not just lying. It is the deliberate erosion of someone's perception of reality. Narcissists don't need to scream or threaten. They just need to ask the right question in the wrong tone. They just need to withhold just enough of the truth. They just need to make you explain yourself over and over, until your words feel meaningless even to you. In traditional Taoist teachings, the concept of Wu Wei, effortless action, reminds us that clarity comes not from pushing harder but from stepping back. When someone creates emotional fog, your instinct may be to prove yourself, to fight for truth, to explain. But sometimes the most powerful action is to observe silently, to let the fog reveal itself for what it is. Because in the stillness, the truth becomes visible. Imagine standing in a forest at night. You have a lantern, but every time you try to shine it on the path, someone gently pushes your hand to the side. You adjust and they move it again. Eventually, you stop trying to see the path at all. You simply follow their footsteps, hoping they know the way. This is what narcissistic confusion feels like. It makes you abandon your lantern, your perception, and walk blindly behind someone who leads only in circles. This is why it is vital to rebuild your connection to your inner compass. One of the first steps is to return to embodiment. Sit with your emotions without naming them. Let your breath slow down. Let your feet touch the floor. Ask yourself not, what should I do? But what is true for me in this moment? A simple story from martial arts. A student asked the master how to avoid being thrown in a sparring match. The master replied, "Don't lose your center. The moment you lean too far forward, you will be pulled. The moment you lean too far back, you will be pushed." Life with a narcissist is much like sparring with someone who never plays fair. If you lean forward, trying to please them, they withdraw. If you lean back, protecting yourself, they attack. But if you stand firm in your center, their movements lose power. It is not easy to do this, especially when you care for the person, especially when love is mixed with pain and hope with fear. But your first responsibility is not to save them. It is to return to yourself. Because once you can see clearly again, once the emotional fog lifts, you begin to realize something, that not all confusion is a flaw in your mind. Sometimes, it is the signal that someone else is trying to blind you. And that realization is the beginning of freedom. There is a certain kind of pain that does not come with bruises. It does not break the skin, nor does it shout loud enough to draw attention. Instead, it sinks quietly into the spirit, until one day, a person finds themselves questioning not just their relationship, but their worth. This kind of harm does not arrive with aggression. It arrives with the slow erosion of personal boundaries. And this, too, is one of the narcissist's most favored techniques. When a narcissist seeks to control, they do not always begin with conflict. They begin with closeness. They create a sense of intensity, of connection so strong that you may feel as if you found someone who finally sees you. They mirror your values. They reflect your dreams. They study your emotional terrain. But what seems like understanding is often strategic. It is the groundwork laid for what comes next. The subtle reprogramming of your boundaries, not by force, but through emotional enmeshment. To understand this dynamic, we must first revisit a principle of Eastern philosophy: everything seeks balance. The body, the breath, the mind, they all seek homeostasis. When one element becomes too dominant, the entire system is thrown into disarray. The same is true in relationships. When your emotional landscape becomes too entangled with another's, you begin to lose sight of where you end and they begin. This loss of distinction is what makes you vulnerable to manipulation. In the language of modern psychology, this is known as enmeshment. It occurs when your emotional well-being becomes overly dependent on someone else's mood, attention, or approval. In a healthy bond, two individuals retain their core integrity. They love, but they do not disappear into each other. But with a narcissist, love is replaced by a performance of closeness. One where your feelings are permitted only if they serve the script they are writing. One woman told me how she gradually stopped seeing her friends. "He never told me I couldn't," she said. But he would say things like, "I just thought we'd spend tonight together. I've had a hard week." Or he'd seem disappointed when I came home late from dinner with a friend. Over time, I started choosing him, not because I was forced to, but because I wanted to avoid the guilt. The strange part is that I didn't even realize it was happening. I thought I was just being loving. This is not an uncommon story. It is the story of boundaries being crossed without confrontation. A narcissist's tactic is rarely to break your fence. It is to convince you that the gate should always remain open. They want you emotionally accessible at all times, ready to soothe their wounds, reflect their greatness, or absorb their frustrations. In time, your emotional resources are no longer yours to manage. They belong to the relationship. But in truth, they belong to them. In Shaolin training, one of the first lessons a disciple learns is the value of the stance, not just as a physical posture, but as a symbol of internal grounding. Your stance reflects your boundary. It says, "I am here, I am whole, I take up space." When that stance is compromised, when your foundation is shaken, every movement becomes uncertain. You become easier to sway, easier to exhaust, easier to control. From a physiological standpoint, boundary erosion leads to a chronic state of stress. The nervous system, when overexposed to emotional demand, shifts into sympathetic dominance, increased heart rate, shallow breath, and reduced immunity. These are not minor inconveniences. Over time, this state leads to burnout, depression, and illness. The body is not designed to be in constant service to another's emotions. It is designed to reflect the balance of your inner world. And when that world is ignored, the body speaks up, through fatigue, through tension, through disconnection. There's a story in the Zen tradition of a student who kept giving away his rice to feed others, believing it to be an act of compassion. His teacher observed him quietly for weeks, then finally said, "Compassion without wisdom is like pouring water into a cracked bowl. You will never be full enough to give from strength." Healthy compassion flows from a filled vessel. But when a narcissist erodes your boundaries, they turn your kindness into currency, something to spend, not something to share. How then do we begin to restore those boundaries? The first step is self-awareness, not just in the mind, but in the body. Begin to observe when you feel tension in conversation. Notice when you are saying yes while your inner self whispers no. Pay attention to the moments when you feel obligated rather than inspired to care for someone. These are the early signs that your internal compass has been overridden. The second step is returning to solitude, not as a retreat, but as a recalibration. In solitude, your own voice grows louder. You remember what you love, what you value, what brings you peace. Solitude is not loneliness, it is remembrance. And from this remembrance comes the strength to say, "This is where I begin. This is where I end." There is no need to announce your boundaries with anger. In fact, the most powerful boundaries are often expressed in silence, in action, in the gentle but firm refusal to be overextended. A narcissist may resist this. They may accuse you of being distant, selfish, or uncaring. But their discomfort is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to preserve the integrity of your own energy, because that energy is the root of all genuine connection. Once a person has lost their boundaries, they are more vulnerable to the next layer of narcissistic control, the cycle of idealization and devaluation. At first, the narcissist puts you on a pedestal. You are admired, adored, and made to feel exceptional. This is not because they see your true value, but because they sense your potential to serve their narrative. You are not loved for who you are. You are loved for what you represent to them. But the pedestal is not stable. It is designed to tilt. And when it does, when you express disagreement or show imperfection, the devaluation begins. The same person who once praised you now subtly criticizes you. They point out your flaws, not to help you grow, but to keep you uncertain, to keep you striving for approval that never fully arrives. This dynamic is deeply confusing. From a neurological perspective, it activates the same reward pathways as gambling. The brain becomes addicted to the hope of returning to the high of early idealization. You begin to believe that if you just act right, say the right thing, avoid the wrong tone, you can bring back the version of them that loved you. But that version was a performance. The real person is the one who punishes you for not being perfect. A man once came to a mindfulness retreat. He was tall, soft-spoken, and carried a kind of quiet sadness. Over tea, he shared, "She used to call me her soulmate. Said she'd never felt anything like what we had. But now, everything I do seems to disappoint her. She rolls her eyes. She says I'm too sensitive. But when I try to leave, she cries and says she can't live without me." He paused, looking into the distance. I don't know which version of her is real. This is the hallmark of the narcissistic bond. It is not based on authenticity. It is based on performance and punishment. You are rewarded for compliance and punished for authenticity. The result is a fractured self. One part of you clings to the love that was offered. The other part shrinks, afraid of triggering the devaluation. Over time, your internal state becomes one of vigilance. You are no longer living. You are monitoring. From the Shaolin perspective, such a state is the opposite of mastery. True mastery does not arise from tension. It arises from alignment. When you live in alignment with your core values, your energy flows freely. But when you contort yourself to earn love, your energy becomes blocked. You cannot move with grace if you are always second, guessing your step. You cannot speak with power if you are always editing your voice. There is an ancient saying, "The tree that bends too far to please the wind loses its root." You are not here to bend endlessly. You are here to stand rooted in truth, even if that truth costs you a relationship. Because no relationship that demands the loss of self is worth the price. One woman, years after leaving a narcissistic relationship, described it beautifully. "It took me months to stop hearing his voice in my head, but the day I made my own decisions without worrying what he would think, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not happiness, not excitement, just peace. It was like returning to myself." That is the gift of healing, not a life without pain, but a life with clarity. Clarity to see manipulation not as love, but as control. Clarity to understand that your value is not defined by how others treat you, but by how aligned you are with your own integrity. The cycle of idealization and devaluation can only continue if you remain emotionally dependent. That dependency is not your fault. It is the result of a system designed to create it. But the moment you recognize it, you begin to reclaim power. Not by fighting harder, not by demanding love, but by stepping back into your own center. Like the martial artist who does not block every strike, but simply steps aside, you begin to move from force to flow. you begin to see that not every invitation to conflict requires your response. Not every insult requires your defense. You begin to understand that the most powerful statement is not always made in words, but in choosing to walk away from what no longer honors your spirit. And this is where your true strength begins to surface. There is a unique kind of silence that follows certain conversations. It's not the silence of calm, nor the silence of contemplation. It is the silence of confusion, of dissonance, of a mind that feels twisted into knots by something that, on the surface, should have been simple. When someone walks away from a dialogue with a narcissist, they often do so with this kind of silence. Not because they have been shouted at or insulted directly, but because they have been spun, subtly, skillfully, into a place where they question what they felt, what they said, and whether their memory of events is even real. This is not miscommunication. This is manipulation by way of distortion, and at the heart of it lies a tactic so insidious that it leaves the strongest among us doubting ourselves. It is called gaslighting. Gaslighting is not merely lying. It is the repeated, intentional rewriting of your reality in a way that makes you doubt your perception, your judgment, and even your sanity. It's the narcissist's quiet weapon, not loud or